Have you ever heard of prevention as a service? It's a thing, and it needs to be a thing. When it comes to stories about people that are bending the potential and making it possible, this is really, really cool. Imagine that you can really and truly get prevention as a service. Because of bad news, you're vulnerable. Everybody is. We just got to accept it. And I don't mean in the like woohoo boohoo I've got problems in my heart kind of vulnerable, though entirely possible. You got that happening too. That's all good. It's no problem. When it comes to prevention as a service for your technology and your business, this is where you want to hear about Perception Point and Shlomi Levin, who is the co-founder. Let's jump in. Hey crew, welcome to the DiscoPosse podcast. My name is Eric Wright. I'm going to be your host. We're going to explore a great conversation on the depth of technology around prevention as a service, why it's a great pairing to what's going on with ransomware as a service, which is a thing, and most importantly, how do you go from research to solving incredibly complex problems in real time? This is like crazy, crazy cool technology. You're going to hear from Shlomi Levin, and as well, if you don't mind, because it's helpful if you want to be able to hear about more stories like this, if you want to just hit that button over there and subscribe and drop us a like, drop us a comment. Let me know that you're liking these kind of shows. This is episode 179. How'd that happen? Anyways, let's jump in. This is Shlomi Levin. He's the co-founder of Perception Point. We talk about the idea of security, the difficulty in solving this in real time, in transit, how they do it as a SaaS, his background, his story of how they founded the company. We're talking a bit about Startup Nation. I'm going to have Shlomi back on, but in the meantime, check it out. This is Shlomi Levin, CTO and co-founder of Perception Point on the DiscoPosse podcast.
So, hi, this is Shlomi Levin, the CTO of Perception Point, and you're listening to DiscoPosse podcast.
Good beauty. All right. You're a pro at this. You've done this before.
Oh, no, I'll try.
So, Shlomi, thank you for joining. I was excited when I saw your name show up on the guest list. I was like, this is cool. Both, your own personal background is really cool. And on the platform and company side, I've been keen. This is an exciting space in the tech world right now. Everything around security and the move. People often talk about shift left, and we'll talk about a lot of different things. But for folks that are new to you, if you want to give a quick background on yourself and then Perception Point, and then we'll jump in and we'll talk about what's the challenge that you and the team are taking on.
Sure. I'm very excited to be here, Eric. Thank you for taking the opportunity, giving me the opportunity. And a bit about myself. I've been in the space of cybersecurity since I was like 12.
Early riser.
Yeah. We had like in Israel. I'm based out of Tel Aviv in Israel, so we had these forums of hacking forums and all them, and also the general world community with the tutorials used to be like in ASCII art. I don't know if anyone remembers that stuff, but that's how far it goes back. So it always fascinated me, the space, which then piqued my interest to further read and then get more into programming and to networks, how they actually work, which really helped me get into the military. So I served in the intelligence and IDF, in the intelligence corps, and then fast forward 5 years, I got out. I finished my service, and then I went to study computer science in a university called Bar-Ilan in Israel. And in parallel, I worked for cybersecurity companies. One was Trusteer on the research team. And then I moved to a company called Cyvera, which was dealt with anti-exploitation in the endpoint. forgot to say, just here we were doing banking Trojans. It was a back then we were reverse engineering the beginning, the rise of banking Trojans. You know,
Oh
I don't know if
wow.
yeah, it was fascinating the way to see how the criminals were evolving in order to extract money and then get in there, and this is when what we call today the whole economical like stealing stuff. It's what's hot today is ransomware, but back in the day it used to be banking Trojans.
Right.
And how it evolved, and that story is fascinating, and how the criminals they run their back ends, and how they funnel money and all that kind of stuff. It's really cool stuff. And then after Cyvera, it got acquired by Palo Alto Networks. I was there for a bit, and then I co-founded Perception Point with two friends from the army. Each one was in their own startup in the ecosystem. In 2013-14 was a very hot in the Israeli cybersecurity ecosystem. A lot of the companies were acquired by bigger ones, so we were basically out of companies to startups to work for. So we made our own.
When in doubt.
uh, yeah.
Yeah. It,
Yes,
what's
that's my
really
background.
cool is it's funny you talk about this, like you see the waves of, sort of like there's a founding wave and then they generally all get acquired in a range of time. And
Yes.
then, yeah, like you said, you go back, you've got all these folks that, you know, had a successful exit, and then they're looking for the next thing. And then, yeah, like you said, you walk around, you're like, well, everyone's been acquired.
Yeah.
I guess we just got to start again.
Yeah. It's very much like that in also in the culture, in the Israeli culture. It's very much quick. Run. There's actually a really interesting book called Startup Nation that tries to understand why is it like that. Why is there
Yeah.
an exit culture here, as opposed to a an IPO culture, which is very big in the States, where people build companies to last longer, and here it's sold very quickly. Um, and I think it's the ecosystem in Israel has changed over the past couple of years, very, very recently, where we're seeing a lot more what we call now today unicorns, but just companies that are rising in Israel to build and to stay and to have a lot of employees and to even go on the Nasdaq. So yeah, it's there's a changing shift, but back in 13-14, it was
Yeah.
yeah, it was different.
Well, it's funny, it's not that long ago, but yet it was a fundamentally different ecosystem, especially like you said, like, so Startup Nation, fantastic read for folks. They should get it in. And it was neat to see, like you said, there's a pattern. And
Yeah,
also the other thing with a lot of you never want to give a generalization, but many of the startups and many of the sort of, like you said, the culture of this is, it's strong research backed, very, there's a lot of education and research that then launches a startup. On the North American side, there's some kid sitting in a Starbucks who sees somebody's dog going to the bathroom on the sidewalk, and they said, I'm going to come up with the poop master, and like that's it. They incorporated in Delaware from Starbucks, and then they launch a single page funnel, and that's like, and their goal is either it's like product based, or then you've got, the affiliate stuff and YouTubers, and you got all this kind of ecosystem. And then on the business side, it's always been this true sort of capitalistic reach for, ringing the bell, for the NYSE and stuff like this. So as historically, I'd say, because the banking systems were so fundamentally different, I think the startup culture mapped a lot to it. But now we're seeing much more sort of global opportunities. And I
yeah.
mean, heck, these days now, like that, the poop master can just, reverse into a SPAC, and then they're a public company the next day. That seems to be the new thing, right? And then sell an NFT of the business plan. That seems to be where everybody goes now.
Wow. No, I guess I don't even know. I don't even have words already to describe this whole thing that's going on, but it's fascinating.
It's
Um,
I laugh because I
Regarding the
see, like,
bell,
yeah,
yeah,
I mean, that's the thing. It's like, in the time that we've seen in just in the last year, it's so wild to see the differences. I mean, the world changed a lot, obviously, in many ways over the last while. But sorry, I cut you off there. You're going to say about the
yeah,
bell.
about the reaching for the bell, I agree. I mean, it's it's a different. Also, managing companies as a and understanding how to build that is also a very big culture thing. which I think in Israel, a lot of the research and the management is kind of mirrored by the military, or because people do the military at a young age, that is how they're primed, if you want to call it. And
Right.
that therefore then it takes more of an angle to that aspect. But a lot of the management, I believe, already in Israel now is older. They've already, the initial priming has maybe reduced on them, and now they're already more corporate, if you want to call it like that. And also there's I mean, I like running with smaller teams, more startup-y as
Yeah.
opposed to corporate. So it can also be a personality thing as well.
Yeah, you tend to also see a lot of, especially like folks that are in the startup area of the ecosystem. They have sweet spots of like you can see them like I work with a lot of sales teams and technical teams like through different phases of startups, and you'll see them and they're like, oh, we're at like 1 million in ARR. I'm getting a little weirded out. Like they're like they like 0 to 1 million and then 1 to 10 million, and you see these kind of like waves of people that come in, and then you see they leave, they go to the next startup, and they do the same thing because they're particularly good at that phase of build. And so it was neat that you went, and now you've seen different phases of joining a company and then going to the ground up and actually founding.
Yeah,
Now
I
it's very
definitely
different responsibility, right?
I can also address that that change that you spoke about, that point in time. But I think we should get to later in the conversation, because we should start like in the beginning. We were talking about I'll log into the trends. You're saying that the waves they come, and when we found a perception point, I like talking about it as a surfer, sitting on the ocean where what we call the break of the wave line.
Yeah.
That's where you wait for the waves to come. And then when a wave comes, so that year, 2015, or was the deception in cybersecurity, it was the deception wave. So we founded Perception Point because we were thinking about names like Deception Point Inception, or Deception Inception Perception, that kind of stuff. Point was because we were initially an endpoint company. So we founded a cybersecurity company that dealt with deception in the endpoint. That was basically the twist off there, because back then all the deception companies that were around were network based. So we went for the
Right.
endpoint. We raised money on that, and we worked on it for 6 months. And then we started doing customer engagement, like trying to understand. Or I mean, we pivoted after 6 months, but during those 6 months, we were talking to potential customers, trying to see how the story resonates, and get a product market fit. But it wasn't resonating properly, and we weren't getting good feedbacks. So we kind of went back to the drawing board, and we kind of brainstormed together, and we got to we have deep knowledge between the founders, the three of us back then, in exploitation or mitigation, and what we call the academic world calls CFI, control flow integrity. So just by chance, Intel PT was just introduced there in I think it was August 15, and we had already been at around January 16. And then we looked and we said, okay, we know that there are technologies that you can build using Intel PT, which is Intel Processor Trace. What it does is it gives you the insight of what exactly the CPU is executing as it happens. It's like a network tap just for the CPU,
Right.
and it gives you evidence for branching instructions. So any assembly opcode, which will be ret, call, or jump, which basically transfers execution, and that's how you implement logic in computers, basically. The Intel PT will give you evidence that occurred, that happened. And then what you have the tool to do with is to reconstruct the execution flow. So this is back when we, from a business perspective, we understood that our technology that we were building is not going to succeed. So we needed to go back to the drawing board. We found this technology and this kind of little blurb that I just gave you about now, and we decided to go for it.
That
Um,
that's and that is not a no one can understand when they don't go through that. There
yeah,
there's two important parts of that story. One is that you have to be able to survive a lot of no to get to what will be a, we talk about product market fit.
Yep.
And this, what we call the pivot quite often is a very unsexy, thing that when you read the books, it's always like, and the chapter 3, the pivot, and you're like, it's as if it happened over a weekend and they went to a retreat and they said, okay, let's change it up. You're like, no, this is like, you go to the market, you test it out, you're doing this pre-revenue as well, which is incredibly difficult because it's a faith-based mission at that point, that
Yes.
we're going to solve this problem. And then, like you said, in customer interaction, in that sort of lean methodology, you're iterating and testing and saying, like, would this work? And like you said, then all of a sudden here's Intel PT and they completely twist the market. And you're like, okay, all right, now we have to move to a different place where we can do this. And so it's exciting that, you had the fortitude and the intellect, to push through it and then take your methodology and then move it to the right abstraction where you can actually apply it.
Yeah, exactly. And when we started telling the story, we even, there's always an intersection in the timeline, right? So we know that we're getting a lot of no's. Okay, so let's change up the story. So we knew what we sat for. I remember the meeting where we sat and we looked at each other and we're like, all right, okay, so we're gonna do what you call the pivot, but it's over a piece. There's a time, but there is an actual meeting that we were sitting at my friend's apartment, and we said, all right, let's do it. And then we started pitching the new technology, which will be like just the tech, just to understand, and the feedback was completely different. And then we knew that we were on the track for something much more interesting. And then we came to the core team, to the devs, and we started outlining what needs to be done and how we see it happening. And then we started working on that and writing it up. Which evolved to be what we call today the hardware-assisted platform. In a nutshell, it's a detonation box or a sandbox, if you want to call it, in where we can record the actual execution flow of a process inside a virtual machine. So we enabled the Intel PT. We have our own patches. We wrote over KVM, where we enable ourselves to monitor a process running inside the KVM from the outside. So host monitoring the internal guests. We do this for security reasons, because virtual machines are isolated.
Right.
So, and
Or
if
at
you want
least
to,
they should be. Wink,
yeah,
wink.
exactly.
Every once in a while, we find out they aren't, but you find out they aren't. Actually, it's really what we can say.
Yeah, we've seen in Pontoon recently really, really respectful exploit chains from the renderer inside user mode going to the kernel and then outside to VM escape. Very, very impressive stuff.
Yeah.
So basically, yeah. So we're monitoring only the guest, the process inside, also user and kernel, in where we get the execution flow from the Intel PT. And then we can say, it gives you like a left, right, like the CPU at this point in memory decided to take that jump, and then you can follow it. In parallel, you also need to get the actual memory that was executed. There's a whole lot of engineering to do that as well. You need to any page that was run by the CPU, you need to have access to, so that the decoder and run when it reconstructs the execution, it can actually, it has two pillars. It has the actual left-right data, the Intel PT data, and the map. So think about it as a maze, right? So you have a map of the maze, and then you have a left-right at every corner where you went. And then that's how you reconstruct the execution, and then you can know exactly what the process did. By the way, we do this live. So as the process runs inside, we're already looking at it to see where it's going. And then because it's a controlled environment, a sandbox, we know what are legal and illegal, if you want to call jumps or corner taking as the program executes. And this is what we call, or the academic world calls CFI,
Right.
control flow integrity. So we can assess the integrity of the flow of the CPU while it renders certain inputs. An input, which is mainly when you go to enterprise security, is documents that are flowing into your enterprise, be them Office documents or PDF documents, links that are coming in. So the browsers are rendering the links. Okay, so
Right.
then you need to see. Today, Chromium has taken over as the engine. So for Edge and Chrome, so you have the same core, but you also have Firefox. So you need to see that the integrity of Firefox is kept and the integrity of Chromium with the same technology that I described. Right, you run it inside a virtual machine, and then you see if the control flow is good or not. Yeah, so that's basically one aspect, and the core IP or technology that we started out with back in there. It takes a long time to write this stuff and
I was gonna
to
say
it, it,
it's not a simple task here. Like it just even mapping the flow in trying to explain to people. Like first of all, you've got just pure CPU. Then you've got stuff that traverses across L1, L2 cache. Intel particularly good at moving many transactions down into L1 cache. They've elevated, like I said, the exposure of the understanding. Then you move over to page TPS transparent. That's pre hypervisor, in hypervisor, in VM, like the amount of places that page traverses, and then to tie it back to the processor turning point is an incredibly complex thing. It sounds like a neat, like almost like a Minority Report type of like thing you would put on screen of like, this is where it turned left and this is where it turned right and this is the page that
yeah.
you accessed. Like that's, but doing this
Yeah.
in real time is disturbingly difficult.
I can talk about the performance, which was very interesting. When we first started these playing around with it, it would take us about there's a lot of data there. Okay, so it was the decoder and the data. So we're looking at about 500 megabytes of trace data and about let's say what we're looking at 100 megabytes of memory as the of the timeline that it was of images that were executed, and the decoder at the time would take it about 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes to run.
Right.
So we're looking at we're looking at 3 megabytes per second speeds. And I was saying, no, this can't be like, we want to do
This is not going to be feasible.
yeah, this isn't feasible because then the client has to wait per, let's say if it's whatever it is, and if it's in an email. So the way you're gonna make now, you're cause a delay of 5 minutes, so that's unacceptable for the business.
Yeah.
So we kept on peeling it and looking at what packets of Intel PT are interesting for us, what aren't interesting. Um, wow, you're bringing me back years, yeah. So everything. That's how it was in the beginning. Yeah. Should I go down? Should I try
Go
and
as
yeah,
deep. This is
yeah.
a this is a I love getting a lesson, and especially
Oh,
like I said, we look at the theoreticals and we often see where it could be. And like I remember Intel when they announced this, and like I saw some of the early work that was being done by the internal team and them sharing it, and it was like, oh, this is neat. But then it was difficult to understand where it was going to be exploited, both on the good and the bad. And I exploit is, I'll say, leverage, but
yeah, are used. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I,
exactly.
I use the word exploit in both a positive and negative context, in that you're using this capability, and you have a choice whether you're white hat or black hat is how you use it. But it was fantastic that they suddenly exposed this capability. But then the first thing I think is like, well, the bad guys are particularly good at exploiting these things. Now it'd be neat to see who can come on the white hat side and do this discovery.
Yeah, and they intended it to be they being Intel intended it to be for debugging and performance evaluation for
Right. Yeah.
software. So it's
The
part of
irony,
Z-Tune.
that's
Yeah,
right. It was something that was meant for a separate purpose, but then could be exploited in a different way,
yeah,
which is quite often how any of these, 0 days get discovered. It was like, oh yeah, darn it, this was a debugging flag, but this is like hardware level, byte
yeah.
coded, very different layer in which this is transacting.
I'll give you the black hat side of it. So there was a research paper by I'm forgetting their name now, the cybersecurity company, CyberArk. They
Oh
came
yeah,
out with
yeah.
a cute little research that they did where if you're already on the computer and you want to spy on different processes, what you can do is you can turn on Intel PT, and then it will show you where the CPU is in memory. The problem is then you need to start also reading the memory of the process in order to reconstruct, and then it just becomes a bit more like too much work. Like if you're already sitting on inside the operating system, so then you already have much more control than what you need from Intel PT. Maybe actually for virtualizations, if you're sitting, let's say, inside of VM on a cloud provider, and you can maybe turn on the Intel PT from the underlying and make him filter out a different virtual machines processes, then you can be actually looking at other people. That can also be an interesting thing.
Yeah.
I haven't done research in that area. Maybe that's an interesting place to look at.
Well, and we saw a real case. I mean, I can't remember exactly when it was. It had to be good like 4 or 5 years ago. But I remember when KVM, it was discovered that there was this type of an exploit capability, and everybody found out real fast what AWS used as their hypervisor, because all of a sudden every AWS instance on Earth had to be restarted in order to put this patch in place for what was found to be as a 0-day that had been exploited. And there was an active exploit in the wild, and all of a sudden, like, oh, I'm getting all these emails from all my AWS instances have to reboot all of a sudden. I'm like, oh no, it's real.
Oh, yeah, that's big. So back to the decoding performance issue that we saw. So Intel PT, the decoder that is maintained by the guys at Intel, has a couple of layers inside. One being the packet layer. So it's basically, it reviews the packet, and that can achieve, if you only go over the packets in the trace, remember about an average of 500 megs per second,
Right.
you can achieve, well, from tests that I did, 100 megabytes per second. So then there's hope. I was describing a 5-minute time to go over the trace. But if you do it at a different level, which means the packet layer, you can get to 5 seconds. And then that was the first like understanding. And then we said, okay, so let's try and see how we can apply our exploit detection algorithms, but at the packet layer, at the faster layer. And then came a whole saga of making it to that speed, or using that layer. The other layers inside are what we call the disassembly layer. So it's basically you get a full disassembly of the execution trace. That's where it consults the memory and basically retells the story of what opcodes were executed one after the other. But the packet layer only gives you like left, right, I jumped here, I jumped there. And then only when you need, you can consult the memory. So all you want to do all the time is reduce the amount of disassembly that you need to actually do in runtime, and try and stay only at the Intel PT data in order to understand that it's a discrepancy. And then you'll go and do the heavier workloads, just to make sure that, like, what we call the cyber checks and stuff. And then that's basically, it's always been like that in computers, right? So trade off to what more you need to inspect at different times in order to get better performance. We achieved a speed of about, I think it was 30 megabytes per second.
Wow.
So that's good. So we brought it down to about 25 seconds a trace. So which now we're already looking good, right? So what we would do is that we would record, stop, and then decode, and then and then scan. So then we did something that we called online scanning. So we'd fold the record and the scanning at the same time. So now you're getting it so you're utilizing it. So instead of taking, let's say, 15-second record or 30-second record and then 25, so under a minute, now you're getting it under 30 seconds.
Wow.
And now, and the latest thing is that we're just implementing our own decoder, and we're getting to speeds of now 60, 70 megabyte per second analysis. So we're ready real time. So as the trace, it's just basically the time that the renderer inside the virtual machine needs to take to render it. And then we're already clearing the processing on the outside. And then once we know what's going on, it's real time now.
Now, again, and it's tough sometimes for people to understand when we think about, the people hear about quantum and they hear about all these incredible speeds we can achieve with computing. You're like, no, this is like in-flight processing of live data that's being measured in a transaction that you don't know what the transaction flow is, like on the software. Like, so like there are software specific things that people go, they build heuristics, they trap certain things. Like there's lots of ways. Like at rest, we're trying to capture stuff, and it's hard at rest. You're talking about doing stuff in real time, and this is a fundamental problem that most people thought couldn't be solved, which is why everybody in cybersecurity moved to at rest or at the ingress.
Mm-hmm.
But you've
Yeah. So
solved
so
this
we
interesting problem now where you've actually unlocked potential, which people, it was much harder to think about solving it where you're solving it than it was just to, hey, we'll just wait till it lands and then we'll try and catch it, at rest.
Yeah, no, so this is all done before it comes into the organization. What I wanted to say about so a lot of the decoding stuff, a lot of the domain knowledge that we started learning now is the whole virtualization platforms and stuff. Like we were more from the exploit world, but now we came more into system, right? So the way we can play with the online stuff that you're saying is basically you play with the VM exit and the VM enters, and then you time it like that. Do you remember how there were airplanes once upon a time, fighter airplanes that had a Gatling gun behind the propeller? How does that work, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So that was what I told the developers in the team. I was like, if they can make that fire bullets through a propeller, then we can do our decoding in between the CPU execution while it runs. That's the kind of metaphor that I would look for.
It is,
Yeah.
and again, this is the first principles thinking, which is, it's very difficult. And I said, massive respect to you and the team for what you're doing, because you just said like, no, we're gonna solve what was generally deemed as either intractable or not worth solving. And it's tough to find people that are willing to take that on, and
Thank you.
then to build a commercially viable opportunity around it as well, which is, and the good thing, I never like to say the good thing about security being a wreck right now in the world, is that like people are much more aware that
Yeah.
this is where we need to begin. So at like the businesses are aware. When you look at stuff like going on, with the dark side attack, and in fact, like little did I know that there was going to be this thing called ransomware as a service. Like not only is it a service, but they have an affiliate program. Like this is the true, Heartbleed has a better marketing department than most startups. We've we've become very aware that like this is where the new battleground is. And so we have to change the way that we think about it, in the same way that the Spartans, no one would have told them they were going to succeed or that was a good idea. If you look at the long game, it didn't actually work out. But, for the 300 movie storyline, at least it was like, in the face of adversity, they went to first principles and they took down, the giant as a result. And you are now, is it using the same principles and solving now, again,
Right,
what
so
most people would deem as intractable.
we went very fundamental, and as well, like you said, the commercial side is very important here, because in the end of the day is how are you going to now make this technology accessible to the market? And that's where we started. This is now we're about. I mean, obviously, the development that I just described took over. It's a 4-year project, still going on, right? So since we pivoted, we're about 5.5 years.
Yep.
Pivoted about a year and a half in, or yeah, no, 6 months in. So no, it's 4.5 years in development. And so what we thought to take it commercially at first was to email security. That was our first idea. And back then we talked about waves. So SaaS was starting to be. I mean, that's a tidal wave. SaaS.
Yeah,
it's
that's right.
it's a concept. It's a paradigm shift, as they say. So that was the new thing. So we didn't even it was funny. Perception Point has always been parallel to that show called Silicon Valley. PP, Perception Point, Pied Piper.
That's right.
There was a competitor I was asked about called not a competitor, another cybersecurity company called Endgame, and in the show they had Endframe, which was kind of funny. Yeah,
It is.
and then
It's hard to tell sometimes whether Silicon Valley is a parody or a documentary.
wow, it's well done. I mean, really kudos to the creators and the writers, and it's an amazing piece of work, an art. And then we brought in the CEO, but he said to us we're building a cloud, and we told him we're building a box. So it was kind of the opposite. And then yeah, we went and we did a cloud service basically. So where we run these hardware assisted platforms inside a cloud provider on bare metal servers because we needed access to the actual CPU
Right.
because of the feature that we discussed. And then we started understanding that to take something commercial is a lot more work than just eating assembly for breakfast. That's not good. It's not going to help you. You need to build a whole operation around this, and this is also what happened in parallel over the since the CEO came in, Yoram Salinger. And we've been working ever since to build first the email security platform. And then we expanded to what we call messaging and collaboration platforms. So today, because of the explosion of SaaS, so companies are consuming SaaS channels or products. So Salesforce is consumed as a service today, and file collaborations such as Dropbox, Box, OneDrive, G Drive are consumed as well. Um, but then we saw that no one was actually looking at the data that is being piped into the organization through those channels. And we just built a threat detection platform. That's what we did as cybersecurity professionals. So we're like, okay, so let's connect the two. So we started an email because that's what we knew, also from our military backgrounds and from where usually the attackers come in from. It's usually from the email. And then we started seeing other channels that this happened in 2008, 17, 18. That's when that kind of started coming in to play as integrations with those services. So yeah, so and now I need to talk about the other technologies that we built. So
Yeah, I was
this
gonna
was a
say,
bit about the commercial. Yeah.
but and just like you said, it's a careful balance, and remember people are doing this while they're both in parallel, and they're generally like a lot of the same resources being tapped because you have to think about like I could market and create a sales messaging for a product, but then I go to you and say, okay, Shlomi, I just told this company, I told, you know, Bank of Netherlands that we can do this thing, and you're going to say we can't do that yet. We could do it. I'm like, well, I just sold it. Like we often get this. There's a real sort of dodge, thrust, parry, fencing type of relationship between the business as a chief revenue officer and a chief executive officer, and then the CTO, where you're
Yes.
saying what we can do that's marketable and sellable, deliverable now, what's directional within the next 6 to 12 months, which is roadmap. And then you have to be also aware of where the the puck or the ball or whatever is going, because you can't just be building for 12 months. You have to always think of the long game, but then execute at different phases throughout. It's a very careful balance.
Eric, I couldn't agree more with you. I really agree with the way you said the parry and the dance and the way you go. It's very accurate, and I can even tail it into it, like from my experience, like to say that I remember we would go to clients in the beginning, and we were offering mainly the hardware assisted platform, which is good at detecting files and maybe 0 days and stuff, but like most of the attacks that you see out there are phishing links and macros inside of Office documents,
That's
and
right.
we've built a Thor hammer to come and take out a 0 day. And so then we're like, okay. So now we need to listen to the market, and then we started dealing a lot with URLs and putting a lot of effort there in identifying phishing sites, and we built an engine that Um, it basically surfs to the sites, and also surfing, building the DevOps of this stuff is a whole different topic. We also have to act like attackers, right? Because the attackers always attack through different, like take for instance Tor. So Tor is always chaining their IP so that they're always masked away from the assets.
Right.
So we also need to mask ourselves because they can identify perception point as a threat detection service and then block them from the attack. So
Yeah,
we
you
have to
could
be
have a
doing the same thing
persistent
to them.
endpoint, yeah, a persistent egress every time you're like, well, I think we know who this is.
Yeah, and the attackers as well. They've really evolved, and they remember they have what we call IP books, right? Like a book list. Oh yes, they manage it. Yeah, we've attacked this IP before already, so we're not going to send them the payload again.
Yeah.
They're no suckers, those guys. So we also have to evade and do all these kind of evasion techniques on our side, and then basically we take a screenshot of the site, and then this screenshot is then compared with image comparison algorithms to see if, because we know how the Office 365 login page looks like, or we know how
Yeah.
the Gmail page looks like. So we compare them, and if the domain is different, then we know we have a phishing site. Once we that engine took a bit time to write, but then when we start seeing that, then you see now their clients are not saying no right away, because now you're starting to catch more of their where it hurts them. And I remember those first, it was about, well, I don't know, maybe 2017 was a year where we dealt only with technologies that we needed in order to make our offering and our threat detection stack fatter. So basically, the three types of files, if you want to call them that, or three types of entities that Perception Point um, is an expert in, is files, URLs, and EMLs, or SMTP hygiene. Because
Right.
that was another problem that we saw. A big problem today, us being a player in the email security, is what we call business email compromise, BEC, in where it's more on the fraud. It's more on the attackers are trying to look like someone that you know,
Right.
and then they'll go and impersonate someone that you know to get the likelihood of whatever they want to do to you. And they've gone so far as not even send files or links to attack you anymore. They're attacking you with words. They're telling you to transfer funds to them from this account to this account, and it works. I mean,
Yeah, there's a reason this stuff is we sort of, when we're in tech, we kind of joke of like, oh my goodness, Royal Bank of Canada just sent me a link and it's like, xy24.rbc dash online dash something dot xyz. And you're
yeah,
like, come on, everybody will know this. You're like, no, no, you don't understand. Like this is why we have DKIM. This is why we have all these different technologies to try and detected an email, but it's like this, just the good old fashioned human going, I see the RBC logo, I'm going to click this just to make sure.
exactly. Yeah. So that took us down that endeavor of emails hygiene, I like to call it, link hygiene, and then file hygiene, where we started to build a complete suit. And then I remember I came to the other co-founder, and I was like, so how's it going now in the funnel, and like when you bring on POC? And he's like, listen, it's different now. And then we
Yeah.
knew, you really know that you've solved the problem, like
Yeah.
that problem now that we could have, and clients were telling us, sorry, like we don't want to use your service because it's not good enough. Now it was being turned around, and then we started seeing it's amazing, just like we spoke about in the beginning, where you tell a story at the investor stage, right? And then you iterate it and you get the feedback, and then you, even if you succeed to invest money on an idea, it still doesn't mean you're going to penetrate the market
Right.
and make, yeah. And then you
And
need to listen to the market, and then you need to pivot in that case. And then also, once you have the technology and you have the direction, you're still going to be getting the feedback, and you're going to still need to iterate. And it's the story of the startup.
well, and there's many bets being made along the way, both at the finance level, at the creator, like the innovator level, and at the customer level. You have the unfortunate problem too, as like you're going into the situation where people totally agree, and you've probably had this, where customers, like, or a prospect, as we call them, I hate that word, but a prospective customer, they say, like, I totally get this. And like, Shlomi, I'm all about what you're doing, and we definitely need this. My concern is that you guys are, 2.7 years old, and I've got company X and company Y that are like, they say they're heading in this direction and they've been around for 12 years. So you have this unfortunate problem where, especially a large organization,
Yeah.
it
Oh, we've seen that.
traditionally was difficult. I think it's getting better because they're seeing that, like, when you look at, like, especially the major banking and financial, they have more developers than the hypervisor providers. Like, they have more developers on staff than most of their technology vendors. So they are a bit more in tune now to, like, okay, we got this really wicked cool Israeli startup, and I think we should try their platform out. There's a little bit more of an appetite, but it's still like the commercial side of it is incredibly difficult.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. Thank God I'm not in that aspect.
Well, and it's funny when we often say that, but like, as a CTO, you have a unique responsibility on every side of the business, and that you're
No,
actually
that's good.
closer to the commercial
Yes.
side than
Yeah, yeah,
anybody
yeah.
would realize, right? But it's, I often, like, people always say that, like, oh, I'm in technical marketing or whatever. They're like, I'm not in sales. I'm like, we're all in sales, kid. Everybody in effect is a
Amen.
forward face of this company. And if you don't understand the impact of the technology on, how it will be sold and consumed, then, it'll be a short life for that person in an organization sometimes, just because they really do, especially in a startup world. Like you said, you have to be, talk about agile, and whatever the phrasing is we call it. It's super exciting, but it's fraught with challenge.
And we are all in sales. I really agree with that. And I've had my fair share of customer interactions and then being in there. And also that, I mean, that would be also a lot of that's the co-founder and I. So he's more of that side,
Yeah,
along with the CEO and stuff. But the other co-founder was much more into on that aspect, and then I would be more on the technology. But even today, it's fun talking to the customers and understanding. And some of them actually, the CISOs, they don't want to see a POC from a salesman until they've spoken to someone who can actually explain. Like we talk now about the
that's
CPU and
right.
stuff, and yeah, and I value that. Yeah, and I'm happy to come to those calls and talk to these guys about the technology and share, what I'm excited about.
This is a huge shift in, like, when I came into the world of tech. It was like through the 90s and the early 2000s. They, like, CIO, they used to joke, says stands for career is over. It was somebody who was from a line of business, and they're just like, we'll put them in charge of P&L for the tech side, which was viewed as a cost center and a drag on the real business. And now it's strategic, and we have technical executives, and the CISO is one of the most important mergers of technology and understanding the impact on the risk to the business. In that, like, at some point when Sarbanes-Oxley came in, all these executives who were non-technical were signing their name on a piece of paper that they are personally responsible for the risk of the company.
Yep.
Then all of a sudden, the need for a technical executive was imperative. And it was wild to see this shift, and all of a sudden the security division had a team instead of a person who was like, hey, let's put Joanne in charge of security. She already, dealt with, like, physical building security. We'll put it under her. And you're
Is it?
like, it's like, no, I don't think you understand this. It's different attack vectors. This isn't somebody piggybacking through a door, behind somebody saying, good morning, Joe, and, like, walking into the cafeteria behind them. They're piggybacking on your network. It's a very different way that we're going to see it. And so we've seen this evolution. And like you said, now no CSO worth their salt is going to let a product come in the door where they don't truly vet the technical founders, on what
Yeah.
exactly it is that they're doing.
Yeah, and we have also seen customers who really know how to compare and to assess the actual product. So when we're up in an engagement where there's other companies also being evaluated, it's fun to see these people and what the attacks that they've previously seen that maybe I hope not, but got through their systems, and then they want to just see if now the current products know how to deal with this kind of stuff.
Well, and we're in a really neat phase. Like I'm excited by like how easy it is to get involved in an active proof of concept versus before it was like the POC process was like you would go to them and said, what numbers do you want to see on the chart when we're done with this? And then you'd go away for 30 days and then come back with a chart that looked amazingly like the thing that they said they wanted. And you would back the numbers into it versus like the customer's deeply involved in understanding the impact on their technology, the fact that there's more than one software in the stack. So they're going to live
Yep.
side by side. There's appliance based, there's software based. And that's also one of the funniest pivots I always see when people are surprised. Like, wait a second, this company went from an appliance to as a service, software only. Like, they've always been that way. It's just that they deliver the appliance as a way to deliver their as a service software. Like, that wasn't a pivot. That was just, they finally were ready to go on someone else's hardware that they could certify. And it's like I said, the process that you talk about is exciting, that the customers are actively involved in this. It's also challenging because now there's many more questions. You can't just walk in with the fancy chart at the end and say, yeah, we did it. Like they really want to test you throughout.
Yeah. To help, we also in the research team we took N days. So these are exploits that didn't have they were software vulnerabilities that didn't have an exploit written for them.
Right.
And to prove our technology, basically, we implemented the exploit. We wrote it so that if you run it on, I don't know, let's say if it was a exploit in Adobe Reader, so you'd run it and it would pop you a little message like hacked by perception point.
Yeah.
And this was it's a CVE from 2015, but the thing is that because the industry was based on signatures, I mean, it depends on where, but for people who don't wait, let's say there's back in right when we started, so sandboxes were all on-prem; they weren't as a service.
Right.
So they were the bigger the organization grew, the more traffic was coming in, and then they had to statistically choose which files they would put or which one. Now we implemented these exploits, and we would come to the client and say, "All right, as part of your testing here, these are files you can test as well against whoever you want." And then there was one client. It was funny. He had a content CDR, content disarm and reconstruct. Do you know those products? They're really cool.
No, this is neat.
Yeah, what it does is if you send it a PDF, so it would break down the PDF to its core components. So this is a stream object, this is a text box, blah blah blah, and then rebuild it. So if there's an exploit inside the format, so then it would be disabled. Content
Right.
disarm and reconstruct. That's basically the name. But the funny thing is that the exploit that in this instance I wrote in Adobe Reader, the content disarm and reconstruct only changed the hash of the file, but the exploit remained intact.
Oh, wow.
So I got what we call that fudding, fully undetectable. So I got a fudding as a service from a security vendor, which was quite funny. So we send it to the client. It popped. So first thing, it got through. Second of all, it popped a little message box. And the guy was like, no, but it didn't do anything to my computer. We're like, no, it popped a message box to run calc. He's like, no, so what if it runs calc? And then we're like, oh no. Well, okay, fine. And then he sent it back to us and it got reconstructed again. So we basically got a new sample that if the first sample was now signatured, then we had a new sample. So it was quite funny.
And
The whole,
the actual like the network and like the whole topology of businesses and the tech stack really fundamentally changed too, because remember, like it was a boon for Gigamon, because all of a sudden there was the only way to catch the stuff was in flight through, so like you only had a limit of the number of span ports you could have on a switch. And so they came up with a span port aggregator, because I'd had like, one organization we had like 20 different platforms and they all required individual span port access. You're like, goodness gracious, like, but each had its own functional purpose. And so that was it. We were Gigamon customers all of a sudden because you just couldn't physically do it with Cisco and Juniper and even Palo Alto, at the time.
Yeah,
And so
the
it
world's
was,
come a lot from there.
yeah.
Like
So
it's
now,
all now a software defined, right? I mean, all that stuff.
and then you get to the cloud providers, and so that's the interesting thing too. One of the problems you bump into when you're going through proof of concept, especially, is you're effectively testing your platform and showing it works is an exploit where there's a lot of maybe adjacent things that are in the network that are like they're going to maybe capture a heuristical change. They're going to see like you the proof of concept is really difficult because you have to exploit it actively in order to really see it in action. Otherwise, it's a lot of like, what they in Sesame Street. So that's maybe it's a North American thing. There's Ernie and Bert. And when he puts
Yeah,
a
yeah, I
banana,
know that.
puts a banana
Yeah,
in his ear, and
yeah.
Bert says, "Why do you have a banana in your ear?" He says, "It's to keep away elephants." He's like, "There aren't any elephants around here." He goes, "See." Right. So like when you go in, you have to prove a negative,
Yeah,
but
how are you going to prove that?
and the
So,
only way to do it is to deliver a positive and then catch it, right?
unfortunately, from my experience, by the way, it doesn't help when you bring your own samples, and even though they're tailored, and we can go to other security guys, and they'll say, yeah, yeah, this thing. I think even if we find 0 days and don't disclose them, which we wouldn't do, we'd all disclose them. But let's say prove it to a client, it still won't be good enough. I think they need to see it on their own traffic. Okay, so they need to
Right.
see it in their environment running. And then, which means that was what I was talking about before, where the POCs, we weren't pausing them because we were looking for these black swans, right? And we needed to be looking for the day-to-day stuff, the phishing sites and the macros and stuff, and we took the platform to there, leveraging the CPU analysis and stuff. But we analyze the macros now as well, and we look at if we can see like exactly what memory inside the Word document, if it came from the VBE model, and it jumped to these kind of API calls, so we can prohibit them or we can flag them. So that's how we can implement, for instance, a macro analysis. And
Right.
then the links I spoke about, the browsers. And then the client needs to see the value on his own traffic, on his own home court. And that's how we saw.
This
Yeah.
is it is incredible. Like I'm always fascinated by when we see this. Like thankfully we've got, you can almost like walk in and just say, look, here's thinking fast and slow proof that this stuff is interesting and solvable in ways that you like humans didn't realize it could be done. It's funny, like Black Swan is like such a perfect description of it, because as Taleb and many folks would talk about, you know, you get asked all the time, how do I know, show me that you can, detect, how do I detect a black swan event? I did disaster recovery and business continuity for a long time. And I would get asked by executives all the time, like, well, we need to make sure that we're ready for an event. I'm like, because so we can predict it. Like, well, you had me up until the predict part. We
Yes.
can be as ready as you can be for an event, but there are sort of levels of preparedness. And there's like one situation I went through as at an organization, we had a power outage. Okay, great, right? So you have a power outage, no problem. You've got a battery, immediately kicks in and turns on a generator. Perfect. Okay, great. Generator turns on, can run for 8 hours. We have a contract with a diesel company, so they will just keep refilling it. Excellent. Okay, well, the problem is the power outage was not just us locally, but it was the entire eastern seaboard. Okay, perfect. So now we have a real problem. We're ready for 8 hours. No worries. We can get the diesel. We're like, well, the Eastern Seaboard's down. So are the hospitals. So are like all these other resources. And guess what? That contract you had with the diesel company is not worth anything because you're not a hospital. You don't have access to this anymore. So this thing that we thought we were prepared for, we weren't.
Hmm.
And there the only way that you could know that you weren't ready was the lived experience. Like
Yep.
I was ready. I knew exactly what we were going into. We went in basically testing the plan.
Yep.
because I
Nice.
built the whole plan for such an occasion as much as I could. A lot of the executive team were not caught in the right light because they said, like, we should be able to get through this. Like, no, we need to be, it's mitigation. Mitigation isn't solving. Mitigation is preparedness.
And
Very
you
different.
also have, I think you have a point in between those two, which is, I guess you can have someone come and simulate we did that a lot, right? So you want to simulate the actual events
Right.
and run it, like run the playbook, and you need to feel it. I was actually just talking to a friend of mine who's did a course in building board games, and the instructor told them that any idea that you have for your board game, try it out. You had an idea. It doesn't matter in your concept, in your thought. You need to see it played, because you need the reality is very multi-vectored,
Yeah,
and you
yeah.
want to see how everything comes and aligns as you experience it, as you play it. It's specifically in cybersecurity, and specifically in the POCs, when vendors, when enterprises or customers try new products and stuff. We've seen this, and we actually welcome it every time. They bring in a red team or another cybersecurity people, that pen testers basically,
Yeah.
to try the actual, they log them, they put all the clients in the POC, all the vendors inside the POC, and now it's hot, it's running. What we call we say wet, right? Like you have dry runs and wet runs, right? So now
Yeah, yeah.
this is a real active environment. This is our, and now, yeah, and go for it, And we even had a pen tester guys, that they were so frustrated with us that they put our service on them as well. So they did get us in one point, and then they helped us on that, and then and ever since we have a very good relationship. Every time they have an idea and they go and they test it out against us, and you
Well,
need
and
this yin and yang.
absolutely. And here's the always the tough part too is, at some point an exploit escapes, right? Something does get through, and the point is, like, develop the new heuristic, develop the new methodology, capture it. Like, there will be a point where a new exploit does get through because nobody was prepared for it. They were ahead, as the old saying goes, right? Hackers only have to be right once. We have to be right every time, right? And it's such a challenge. And then the scary part as a platform vendor, and is that we all know the name SolarWinds now, not because
Yeah,
of the amazing depth of technologies they present, because they've been called the SolarWinds hack. And it's terrifying because for a decade they're going to be labeled with that, even if they get through it, even if they get past it, right? There's a very different responsibility as a security platform of, like, you have to not just maintain your customers' integrity, but your own.
yes.
It's an amazing thing. Like I said, and that's why massive respect to you and the team, that, like, you're doing fantastic stuff at the technology layer, but then showing it, like, in the business value, obviously that's going to give you the commercial benefit that you well and truly deserve.
But Eric, there's a very good question. There's a, how well are we secure, right? I
Right?
mean,
Yeah, that's right.
so obviously, yeah, we instate our software development security lifecycle. That we have this, yeah. Code doesn't go in without being reviewed by a person. In the case of SolarWinds, I mean, those guys were right. They were sitting in the build server and injecting code that will be signed as well while it arrives into the different platforms. That means you need to be inspecting every area of your development, the staging environments, the production environments, code integrity, and runtime. And there's a lot of challenges on that. So that means, yeah, we also need a CISO, and we also need to be protected and be on top of these things. Actually, the American government just came out with a new, like a SOC 2,
Right. Yeah, yeah.
a new one. They called it CMMC or MCCM. I'm a bit I'm not sure.
So many too many acronyms in our world.
Yeah. But which is raising the bar. I mean, yeah, this needs, you need to know where your code that you're running is coming from, and that is incorporated inside your platform as well, and every bit there and byte. Um, and don't ever forget reflecting trust on trust. a very, very old and brilliant concept, which is you don't know. I mean, you need to write. You have a compiler, right? So you have the source code of the compiler, but maybe who wrote for it's like the egg and the chicken and the egg.
Yeah,
Maybe the
yeah.
compiler is compromised.
Yeah,
So
just like the human body, the antibody is in fact a virus. It's the way it's the reaction to the virus, but it itself is an exploit. It's
yeah,
such an interesting, world. And like you said, this is, the solar winds, and I know of a ton of great people in there, and look like this is it was signed code that made it through. Like if we look at the fundamentals of it, it's very difficult to capture this stuff. No one will get caught twice. This is one of the things, right? It's and I do hope that they have faith, that customers have faith in the next phase of them as a company and in the technologies. And I said and because of like what you and the team are doing is like you have a chance now to we can change the way we attack this problem. And it's exciting. It's I should my non-nerd friends will never get how exciting this is. I'm like, you understand everything you click, you just like the human side of it is a fundamentally different thing.
what we call the meatware, right?
Yeah, that's right. But we used to, when I was a kid, a kid, a long time ago for sure, at least, it was like, they called it PEBCAC. It was a problem exists between chair and keyboard. It was, and that was the chair keyboard interface is what broke the software. And we have this, like all of the security in the world, it won't stop. Oh, hi, Shlomi. This is Eric from the help desk. Looks like your mainframe password may have been compromised. Can you just confirm what it is? I want to, and to be like, oh my goodness, of course you're calling from the help desk. Like, I used to do this as basically a fishing expedition, a human fishing all the time in my organization. I would phone them. I just like go to a random phone in the room and just say like, "Hey, this is Pete from the help desk. Looks like we've got a problem." And like, "Oh my goodness, yeah, it's January 1, 2, 3." I'm like, "Okay, good. Looks like we're okay. It was a different password that was being logged, so we're in good shape. Thanks very much, and appreciate your attention to security." Like, oh god, like all the
Yeah.
software in the world isn't going to save us from Joe in accounting who's going to give up his password over email, right? But
Wow.
that's a
Yeah.
different
No.
problem that we can't solve. No software in the world will solve
Yep.
that problem. But with that, so Shlomi, thank you. Like we've gone in a lot of really exciting directions. I'd love to actually have you come back and we'll talk about the business and the startup build process, because we had so much good stuff. I didn't want to derail and kind of circle back on that, but I'd love
Mhm.
to have an at length conversation about your team's journey through funding and building and expanding and what that looks like, because that's definitely,
Oh,
again,
with pleasure. Yeah, of
it,
course.
it's exciting for people to hear that side of the story. And I didn't see any reason to cut off what was a fantastic conversation on the technology side to get to that.
So should I go into that now or
Well, I'll tell you what, we'll save that if you're okay. I'll set up a second time and we'll have you back, because I definitely want to really spend time and iterate through that, because that itself
perfect?
is
Yeah,
a full set of chapters
it
that needs
is.
to be explored without being rushed.
Yeah, yeah, and I have this kind of story where once in a while this delegation of a startup delegation comes through the office, and these are people, South African people that come to Israel for Startup Nation reasons and stuff.
Yeah.
And then I give that talk. I have like a talk about that,
Oh,
and then
fantastic.
yeah, yeah. So it will come up as well, like with the Silicon Valley paradigm.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay,
Excellent.
no,
Well, so
with
Shlomi,
pleasure.
for folks, I'll have links to everything as far as getting access to folks if they want to learn more about Perception Point, which they should.
Yeah,
It's easy to find. Prevention as a
yes.
service is something that is, I love the tagline. It's a beautiful description of what's really necessary. And if they've listened to this, they understand what goes into it. Is an incredible challenge that you and the team are getting through. So congratulations on that. And if folks want to connect with you directly, what's the best way they can do that, Shlomi?
Yeah, just email me, Shlomi at perceptionpoint.io. There's a hyphen in between the perception and the point. Yeah, that's it. Pretty easy.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'm here. And I'm really happy to discuss this stuff. Like, it's exciting for me. Cybersecurity will always be.
Well,
So,
and
yeah.
I tell you, this is why it's a rare treat to find, like, it's a difficult thing. People don't also, technology is one problem. Being able to explain technology in an exciting way that can entice people to care about it. Like, that's really what
Yep.
it is. And
Yep.
it's like, I know a lot of fantastic technologists that probably wouldn't pass a Turing test if they were put in a room full, like, there's a code layer, like, they've got a different part of their brain is active that
Yep.
they've had to effectively surrender a portion of the brain, which is the marketing, like
Yeah.
the true
People.
introverts. I'm an introvert by nature, but I'm an extrovert by career. I hit a wall every once in a while. I'll say I'm like Asperger's light. Like, every once in a while I'm just like, okay, I gotta go. And I just have to leave the room and just like walk around the block a couple of times and
Yeah.
reset. But so like I said, to meet somebody like you who can, dive into the tech, relate the story, and ultimately that makes you a great mentor and a sharer that other people can learn, and then there's like the true code layer. But the amazing thing is, like I said, then you could probably sit down at the keyboard with them and
Yep.
blow some
And
minds with what you can
yeah.
do down there too.
All right. Yeah. So
So,
thank you very much, Eric. I really enjoyed it.
excellent. Shlomi, thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah.